Hey everybody, this is Richard and welcome to another episode of Fatal Error. This show began as a research project for me to understand how entrepreneurs and founders think about the climate emergency and figure out ways in which all organizations, not just non-profits, can become climate positive. Today's guest is Katie Patrick, activist, entrepreneur, author, and unashamed optimist. I really wanted to speak to Katie because while, like most of my guests, she has deep concerns about our environmental impact, she refuses to be conquered by doom and gloom. Let's hear what she has to say. Yeah, so, I'm trying to speak to entrepreneurs who are doing something in the space, who have some kind of different point of view on the whole issue. And what I'd love to talk to you about is sort of your journey and your views on how things are kind of unfolding at the moment, which in the context of your sort of situation there on the west coast of the US at the moment is probably very kind of real for you right now. But yeah, does that sound okay? Is there kind of any questions, I suppose, or is that? Does that
No, we can just jump in.
Okay.
Just ask me whatever. I'll just answer it.
So let's just jump in then. So so the main thing is you've been involved somehow or other in this space, right? Environmentalism. I think when I saw one of your posts or talks, you said since you were 8, right? With different kinds of activism, different sort of organizations and so on. So can you tell me your brief, sort of bio of what you've done in the last, years, of what companies you've set up or projects you've started?
Wait, I'm just, are you there?
Yep.
Okay, I just changed to my, no, I can't see your face. Jeez, I'm the wrong way around. Okay, so ask me again.
I'll ask you again. Okay, so let's start with the basics. Like, what is your background in, you started a bunch of different projects. How would you kind of describe your career so far, I suppose, right? As an entrepreneur and activist.
Yeah, well, I was always interested in the environment. I cared a lot about plants and animals. I liked to draw flowers as a child, was deeply moved during the 80s. There was a lot of big Greenpeace style public environmental campaigns around then. And then I studied environmental engineering and went into green building. I was a green building engineer on commercial buildings. But that felt kind of boring and stale. So I wanted to do something that was more fun. So I started a media company. And I didn't know what the word startup or venture capital or anything was then. I just wanted to do something really cool. And I really wanted to be my own boss. I wanted to be independent. And I was quite young then. That was when I was about 23 years old. I started my own company. And I had never heard of Silicon Valley or startups or any of that kind of thing.
Because you were at the time, you were in Australia, right?
Yeah, this is in Australia.
Yeah.
But I'd grown up. My parents had a small publishing company that made a shopping directory. So I kind of knew what it was like to sell ads and put things into print. I'd been around that. So I just got on the phone and started selling ads and for this green directory and green magazine. And then I built that up I ended up getting $1 million in venture capital. I sort of pieced that together and grew it into quite a successful company over the next few years. But then I moved to that sort of, digital media has its limitations. When you're just kind of funding things just through content and selling ads, and I was getting really exhausted by the treadmill of just putting out content and selling ads. And I moved to Silicon Valley because that's where everything was going then. This is at the time when like Facebook just first came out and
so this is
Twitter was first coming out.
Early 2000s, like early noughties, this kind of time?
Yeah, probably late 2000s, like 2008, 2007 to 2009. That's when all that stuff started to become really big.
Yep.
And that was like the natural direction that anyone who was entrepreneurially inclined took. But also I was getting very tired from not doing anything that was intellectually challenging for me. So I really needed to be in a community of people that were, had maths degrees in computer science and engineering, because all I had been doing is selling ads and making content for so many years. I kind of came back to find my people and my core training that was like heavily sort of maths and physics based that
Okay.
I really drifted so far from. So I really kind of found my people in Silicon Valley, and then started getting into this idea of this Fitbit for the planet design. Like if we could measure things, if we could get data, if we could show people's electricity consumption. This idea of showing people real-time feedback loops of data to influence them started to dawn on me that this was a huge space that we needed to get really serious about. And so I started developing new ideas for startups from that, not making content like magazines and videos anymore, but ideas for apps like Energy Lollipop is one we're working on that shows you the CO2 of the grid. It shows you in real time, it shows you in color, in a user interface design that's gamified and rewarding.
Okay, what do you mean it shows you? What does it show you exactly? So, you know, if I install
Shows you the
app,
carbon dioxide that the California grid is putting out at any one time.
okay, and what do I do with that information as a consumer? Is it just...
Well, there's two. So there's one for the state of California. What you can do is that you can look at it and you can see that after dark that the carbon dioxide massively spikes because there aren't any solar panels putting clean energy into the grid, and people also use more electricity. So if you want to lower your own carbon footprint, you want to be really careful about using electricity after 4 or 5 p.m. So part of that's that role, but also if you're looking at creating a campaign, if you're a professional person working on trying to decarbonize the electricity grid, this data is very moving because you can look at it and you can see on some days we actually have 100% clean power during the day, and then on other days we don't, and you're like, well, why does that day not have it and that day does have it?
Okay.
And why is it still at 5 kilotons of CO2 during the night, every single night?
Do you have any
5
answers
kilotons
to
of
that
CO2.
as yet? Do you know why it's, you know, some days it's clean, some days it isn't?
Roughly, I mean, I don't know exactly because the data doesn't show us that. But the weekends, it's always really low. And I think that's because people are outside. On the weekdays, it's higher. On cloudy days, it's a bit higher because the solar is not as much. So the only difference I've seen is between work days. And then as it gets warmer, people put on air conditioning more. So basically an ideal temperature, and so ideal that everybody's going outside, that's when it gets really low. As soon as it starts to get hot and people start using air conditioning, that's when it really starts to spike in a big way.
Okay, so is this the main thing you're working on at the moment, or do you have any other kind of interesting or important projects happening?
Well, there's another, Energy Lollipop is multifactional. So there's another a browser extension app that we've done that shows you kind of the same thing, but for your own home. So you can hook it up to your own electricity consumption. It'll multiply that kilowatt hours by the CO2 of the grid. And because your podcast is called Fatal Error, I'm thinking that everyone is like a computer programmer or is going to understand some sort of some technical stuff. I can just talk normally.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, that's sort of like where I'm coming from. That was the intention. It's sort of a broader audience at the moment, but yes.
Yeah, okay. So we multiply the kilowatt hours, which is just electricity, by the CO2 that the grid is putting out. And the grid puts out a different amount of CO2 per kilowatt hour during the day. In California, it's almost completely clean around lunchtime. About dinner time, it's really dirty. It can go up like tenfold in its CO2 in the evening. So we don't show you how much energy you're using, which is how it's usually done. These apps or interfaces will just show you kilowatt hours. We show you CO2, which is a much more important number because, you know, one light bulb turned on for 20 minutes at 7 p.m. is going to give you a totally different number to if you put it on in the daytime. So we show you CO2.
Yeah, that's a really important point, right? I mean, first of all, most people don't know what a kilowatt hour translates to in CO2, including myself. But also, that's the main thing, right? It's not electricity that's the bad thing. It's the way it's produced.
Yeah. Just focus on the real number. The real number is we're trying to get CO2. So people often come up with these ideas like, let's show a ratio of clean to dirty power. And I'm like, nobody gives a shit about a ratio that you've got 76% clean power or whatever. The only thing that matters is the kilograms or tons of CO2 that you're putting out right now. So let's just show everybody that, you know.
Okay, so
that's just what it does.
So are these non-profit projects, or are you planning to generate revenue, or are you already generating revenue from these kinds of things?
It is pre-profit.
Pre-profit, okay. So what's the business
Pre-profit
model
means
you're
that it's a
thinking of?
startup. No, we've been only working on it for 6 months. So, and 6 months during COVID. So Energy Lollipop has had, we're just in the early stages of getting it off the ground.
Okay.
But there are actually 2 usable products that people can download and install. And there's another one I'm working on called Urban Canopy, which does high resolution imaging of urban heat islands. So you can search your address on a map and you'll be able to see how hot that area is using satellite imagery or aircraft imagery.
So okay, so those are pretty cool, right? Those are pretty cool things, both of them. And I hear about a lot of pretty cool projects and apps in this space. Either some fancy new way of measuring this or that, or visualizing something or the other. But it seems like a lot of people I speak to, at least, it's either we're doing something cool and we're going to put it out there and it's a resource for people to use, or else, it's very hard to find a way of actually making a living doing something like this. So who's buying this? Who's funding, as a consumer, who's paying for these kinds of things that can make the work you do something which you are doing something good for the environment, but also creating a business around it?
Yeah, well, we're working on it. I mean, the projects are too young at this stage to have any revenue. Okay. And when I mean young, it doesn't mean that they're sort of not built up. It just means that they're tackling pretty substantial problems with really big organizations. So it takes a long time to meet all the various parties. They're heavily involved with government institutions, really big infrastructure data sets, and not-for-profits that work across a lot of people. So it's not the type of thing that you can just whip up a quick MVP and sort of get a few customers. Like it's quite a process. So the commercial model we're looking for is to partner with these. We have these things called CCAs in California, which are kind of like these small energy utilities. They're not like the big sort of energy utility. They're kind of the big energy utilities started to break off into these small not-for-profits, and they fund energy efficiency programs. So we're looking to partner with them, and so they would fund the product that then becomes free to the user, and then every time someone uses it, that helps them achieve their goals. So that's the current plan that is currently being worked on. And if that was to totally fail, if they were like, no, we don't want to be a part of that, we would probably run it like a media company where we get commercial sponsors, where we just look to get a really big audience, and then it gets sold. It's similar to what I used to do as a magazine, when you just kind of sell eyeballs. You get energy efficiency products or EV cars, and then they kind of sponsor it, and then we do it that way. So they're the commercialization models we're going for.
So how do you balance, the need for profit or generating revenue with the social good aspects of something of the sort? I mean, first of all, are you, doing this, are you primarily driven by sort of the need to create something, or is it that you want to help solve this climate problem? Is there something that is more dominant there?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's something that I'm often sort of internally, or for a very long time, since my early 20s, have been sort of reflecting on kind of what internal place you come from. And I personally don't think it's a good idea to ever come from a place of pursuing just business and profit, or on the other side, to just come from a place of wanting to sacrifice everything for the planet. I don't think either of them are healthy. The place I come from is I just do what creatively rocks my world. Like what I feel, if I'm an artist, like if I were Lady Gaga and I wanted to put on my version of the Super Bowl, what would that be? I want to reach my own creative peak. And to do that, that requires money, that requires funding. And it requires you to get popular and to become well known, not you or like whatever product you make. And I find that I've been pretty diligent in pursuing that as my sort of core sort of modulation or energy that I come from. And it really pays off. Like there's been nothing that has told me that this is a bad way to do it, because I do really good quality work. It pushes me to do the best creative work I can do. And that really attracts people to me. Like all the time, people are contacting me. People want to hire me for things. I do freelance work. people find my book. The people I reach out to are excited to get to know me because they look at all the stuff I've done. And that's because I'm always pursuing creative excellence. And it has to, and emotionally, like I have to love it. Like when I think about, currently I'm trying to figure out how to put energy lollipop billboards of city CO2 all around the world. I'm doing that because, not really because of, sort of because of the planet, sort of because, you know, it might make me a living or turn into a profitable startup, but mainly because it creatively rocks my world. Like I think that would be massively cool.
Okay, so tell me, you mentioned your book.
That's all I want to do. That's all I want to get out of life, really.
So you mentioned your book. Can you tell me a bit about your book?
My book is called How to Save the World, How to Make Changing the World the Greatest Game We've Ever Played. And that's right? It's a very sort of what's the word? You know, as titles goes, as titles go, that's a very sort of bold claim, right? Bold
like
title.
Yeah. Which is great. It's a great way of sort of attracting attention. But you know, how do you save the world with your book?
Well, I mean, the title is actually a bit of a joke. I'm not sure if that comes across. It's kind of like, you know how like in the 80s there were like things that was like save the world, you know, stickers and t-shirts that said save the world. And so I had a PowerPoint that I called How to Save the World in 10 Steps. It was a little bit of a joke, like how to lose 10 kilos in 10 days. It was like How to Save the World in 10 Steps. But I kind of really like that How to Save the World title. Otherwise it would just be something boring like behavioral psychology and gamification for social impact. That's what it would be called if it had a technical title, right? Like a I don't know, but I'm not going to call it that. So it's basically just a 10-step framework to follow for how to actually bring you right into the causality of making sure that your project or idea really makes change. And it is highly leveraging this idea of using feedback of data, having a measurement-driven system for coming up with your ideas, and learning what we can from behavioral science of what really works to get people to act, and from game design and from user interface design. So people come up with ideas that actually can have a measurable change. And the reason why this is so important is because people come up with ideas all the time for the environment and for social impact. And there is no way that that idea is going to have anything to do with helping that cause. Like festivals are a big one. All the time, there are Save the Earth festivals. There's no relationship between a festival and that festival actually getting solar panels on anything or more people that drive EVs. Even like vegetarian or vegan festivals. You know, the only people who go to vegan festivals are other vegans. That means 0 extra meat is taken out of the ecosystem. So people have this really flawed idea of the causality, of the causal mechanism for what affects change. So my book takes you through this whole design thinking technique, and it's very much based on examples of stuff that works. People study this thing. It's called environmental psychology. There are hundreds of academic papers about it, of what actually gets people to change. My book takes you through that. And it's pretty life-changing for a lot of people who are trying to develop ideas and startups around environmental change, because most people haven't heard of this stuff before, and it's really, really important to know about. I personally I don't think anyone should come up with a campaign idea or a startup idea until they've read my book. Not because I'm trying to promote my book, but you need to get across these concepts. And the only other way to get across these concepts is to dig into the academic literature and read academic journals.
Okay.
But I've done it for you, so you don't need to.
So there's
nothing else like it. Actually, no, there's one other book called Sustainable Behavior Change or something like that. So that's a big help. But my book has a lot of other stuff around technology in it. Okay.
So you're saying that, so this is about measuring impact, right? And sort of the impact you want to achieve. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's an essential backbone of the book. It's about bringing everything down to a measurable indicator and then building your strategy up from that, which may sound really obvious, but most people don't do that.
Well, it does sound really obvious, but many things sound really obvious once you sort of say them. It's coming up with them that can be hard sometimes. Okay, so it's interesting you mentioned some of the things you do, because I had, one other conversation I've had in a sort of earlier episode with Kenneth Bowles, who was a designer, and we spoke a little bit about these kinds of things. And at the time that we spoke, his view was a little bit more, or to use the phrase you mentioned earlier, sort of a little bit more doom and gloom. Like, not in the sense that this is unsolvable, but it's a very hard kind of thing to deal with emotionally. Whereas, like I mentioned, I saw your talk, and your kind of like whole thing was around, well, I'm really bored of all this doom sort of and gloom approach to environmentalism, climate, and so on. So fair enough, but why aren't you? You know, are you, first of all, you know, are you basically not worried, or is it like just a way of dealing with the worry that you try not to focus on the doom side of it?
Well, nobody's asked me this yet. Well, you've got to say, I felt like Greta Thunberg when I was 16 years old as well, right? So now I'm nearly 40. So we've got 25 years or so since that emotional phase. So I remember what it was like.
Hang on a second. When you say you felt like Greta Thunberg, in what sense? Of like this kind of despair?
Oh, like really distressed. You know, like when she gave that United Nations talk, and she was obviously palpably very upset and very angry. Like I felt the way she felt then. Okay. About stuff, you know. And then I put myself to work trying to solve things, you know, professionally. Like I did the degree, the environmental engineering degree. And I found that there was like a really big professional community of people who really worked on stuff, and it wasn't upsetting. I wasn't on the outside anymore. Then I was on the inside. Like I had a corporate job. I could influence people. And then I just fell in love with the ability to start to influence things. Like it's very exciting when you can get inside a corporation or work with a media company and then get the message out, you know, in a way that you never really thought you would have had access to. Like when I was 17 years old, you know, and I just had like Doc Martens on and like, you know, messy hair and was listening to the Dead Kennedys or whatever, like I wouldn't think that I could have like gone inside a corporation and pitched a sustainability policy and helped develop a technology that could actually help save a rainforest. You know, like I didn't have that kind of imagination or professional scope then. But then a few years later, I realized I could do that. So it was just so much fun to like meet other people and come up with ideas and realize that I could access funding. And I just, the idea of actually changing stuff became so fascinating and fun to me. It was like, why would I worry just feeling bad about everything? So that's all in all. I mean, I'm just so in love with the process of fixing things. It's kind of like, say you've got like a really messy room. You can look at the room and be like, oh my God, it's so messy. I'll never be able to clean it. It's disgusting. It's a disaster.
Yeah,
or you can just get in that
moment,
clean.
actually, but yes.
Yeah, I thought I'm going to turn my camera on so you can, or you can just be like really in love with the process of cleaning, being like, wow, look, I just cleaned this bit and then I cleaned that bit and that was so cool. And now we can clean together. You know, I've really just emotionally moved on in a big way. And I think most people who professionally work in this space have. And also I just kind of like, I'm a big fan of Steven Pinker's work of looking at how much humanity has evolved over time. Like I am genuinely worried about climate change. Like I think it's pretty scary. But I also think if you really look in terms of geological time, you know, even if we do have another mass extinction, like they call it like the sixth mass extinction, it's like, well, all the animals came back. You know, we had 5 before that and all the animals came back, you know, like the earth is sort of going to be doing its thing. Even if we do a lot of damage, like it's all just kind of in the universe's flow, you know. Well, I don't think it matters. Like,
I think the sort of the key issue, I suppose, is whether we're around, rather than, you know. I think one of the, you know, a lot of people talk about save the planet, for example, which is often criticized as, you know, the planet's fine, the planet's going to be fine for a very long time. It's more about whether we can live on the planet. So yes, I agree with you from that point of view. But are you less worried? Like, are you less worried about the severity of the situation from working on it?
Well, I'm not that worried about the planet, because I think the planet, when we talk about problems in the environment, what nobody tells you is that a lot of the environment is still there and it's still really healthy. Like we still have ecosystems all over the place, right? It's not completely gone yet, you know, like it's still there, it's still working. Okay, the coral reef is half gone, but the coral reef is still half there. So there's a lot of stuff still there. nature is enormously resilient in terms of evolving and surviving. So I don't really want to get too much into the doom space of thinking. I just kind of think about the glass as half full, like the ecosystem is still half full. And also, honestly, in your life, I mean, no single person is ever going to be able to make a big dent in any of these issues. Like, these are very, like, deeply ingrained, very difficult problems to solve. And all we can do is just do our bit. So all I ultimately have power over is my own creative flow, like using my own gifts, my own energy to do the best I can do. And that's the only thing I have control over. So I don't really need to worry about anything else. I just try and do that every day. And just getting all upset about stuff, I think, is not very relevant and useful. And I don't even know if it's true. Like, if you make a list of 100 good things happening in the world, you know, you'll be like, wow, that's awesome. You could make a list of 100 bad things and just go around feeling sorry for
there's a
everything,
load of good stuff happening, for sure. And it's easy to lose sight of that when you focus on just sort of the maybe the one negative thing that you're thinking about, or that's worrying you. So, you know, in the context of that conversation, what's your view on sort of the non-profit activism? Like, how useful is that? You know, I don't know whether you're familiar, for example, with you know, like Extinction Rebellion, which is something that has sort of become a bit more widespread here in the UK, at least. Have you heard of that organization?
Yeah, I've seen a bit about them on Twitter.
Like a civil disobedience kind of approach to the issue.
Well,
I'm not, you know, I'm not in a sense of like judging them as like, oh, they should stop or not, but just curious to know, do you think that kind of activity is as impactful as, for example, entrepreneurship or something else?
well, let's not categorize it, you know, like in terms of that ways. Let's categorize it in terms of causality. This is a thing I bang on about all the time. Causality,
Okay.
causality, causality. If 10,000 people, I don't know how big they're, 1,000, 10,000 people go out in Extinction Rebellion and do whatever, does that have any direct, and I'm assuming because it's called Extinction Rebellion, that it's trying to help protect ecosystems, vulnerable ecosystems.
It's more about, you know, it's more about the extinction of the human species. So that's what they're worrying.
Okay, well, there are a lot of humans left, so I don't think we really need to worry about that. But, and this is what my book is for, right? It's for taking something like that through a critical thinking path and understanding a strategy to make a causal link, right? So if they are about extinction of species, you would think, well, does that protest, if I can track a year later, did it help any polar bears or dolphins or whales or any less charismatic species I've never heard of that are endangered? And I suspect that the people who work on these, there are plenty of scientists who work as ecologists on endangered species. And if you ask them, what is the most important thing we need to have happen to make sure this species stops being, doesn't become extinct? Would they tell you, I desperately need 5,000 or 10,000 people in London blocking the street?
Well, they might not say that.
That might not be.
No, they might not say that. I mean, most probably they won't actually, but
so there might be, though, a very specific law that needs to be changed, right? So when you go into that, they'll be like, well, that one species is being affected by that one particular company who is damaging that particular ecosystem, who's funded by that bank. And the only way to stop them is to create this one bit of legislation to do with trade. There'll be some mechanism in there to try and stop that, right? So if they work all of that stuff out, and then they try to get the law changed, they try and approach the bank, you know, they try and approach the company, and everybody's just on deaf ears, and they've tried, you know, wearing suits, speaking to everybody, doing it the nice way, then they're just going to be like, fuck you, we're going out on the street. And this is exactly what we want. We want the bank to stop funding it, we want the corporation to stop, and we want this bit of legislation through, and we want it now. Mm-hmm. And then something like, if it's very specific, it's very causal, then something like that protest could be really powerful. It'd be like, we've asked you 20 times, you're still not doing it, you know? But I think when it's just really random, sort of broad brush, I doubt it really is going to be creating any change, because you're not asking for change. Change has to be extremely specific, you know, very, very granular about what you want to actually affect. So I don't think it matters whether it's civil disobedience or whether it's like grungy activism or people wearing suits. It just has to be based around causality, and that you can say at the end of 12 months, we made a measurable difference on what we were trying to change.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense, I suppose. I think there's a lot of anger around a lot of these issues, and it's not always very sort of well directed in a very specific way. But and I don't personally have, you know, I find these kind of organizations hard to sort of categorize in my head as well. Like I'm not sure I would join, but I kind of like want them to be there at the same time. Because you need a bit of an extreme presence sometimes. Besides, it's like you need a spectrum of activities happening.
I mean, it's also people are learning as well. Like when people turn a certain age, like they turn 18 or 25, they don't know everything about how to impact change. They don't necessarily have any agency. So maybe that's just where people are at in their own development. I mean, I used to go to all those protests when I was like 14 and 16 and really get into them. And that's where my head was at then. I didn't know any different. And then over the years, you start to work stuff out. So it's kind of okay for people to be their like first draft or second draft as they kind of understand how to be genuinely influential. And I mean, people also project their own emotional suffering onto world issues like all the time. Like people have, you know, problems with their parents, you know, problems with life, problems with themselves, which is not a criticism because we all have these problems that we have to work through in life. And it's very easy to say, I'm fucked up because of capitalism, because of deforestation, because of gender politics, you know, without actually dealing with your own emotions. You know, I deal with my own emotions quite separately to how I deal with the planet. Like, I don't think capitalism or whatever is kind of like the problems between, you know, that I have in my own family. So people have got to separate their emotional development separate to like their wider politics.
It does become a bit of a mishmash sometimes, and I speak from experience as well. But yeah, that's true. I think that's covered a lot of different things there, and I'm trying to keep the conversations fairly short. So I'd like to wrap up with just one small question from you. So for somebody who is maybe, irrespective of whether they're, you know, young or not, or whether they're on a sort of first or second draft or something along those lines, what's, you know, one of the things that you've done from what I've seen is that you've managed to build yourself sort of quite a brand and following in the, like, at least in social media, right, and so on. Is that, you know, if that's focused a lot on this kind of environmental approach or issues, right? What would you say has resonated with people to make them be interested in what you have to say? That, you know, like what's a lot of people kind of work on stuff like this and they don't really manage to get the message across. But what has worked for you?
I don't know. You tell me. What do you think? I don't know what resonates with people. What resonated with you when you found it?
With me? Well, yeah. Well, to be honest, what resonated with me was that I saw sort of like your list of projects and the kind of things that you were saying, and I felt like this is somebody I want to speak to because I want to learn from you, right? So, but I'm, you know, as somebody who has gone through I'm very new to this whole journey myself. It's only been a year or so that I've been really sort of get stuck into this environment. You seem to have been involved in this for a longer period of time, but you know, what gets people paying attention to environmental issues aside from the doom and gloom side of things, which is often a bit of a stick, right? It turns people off.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, I don't know what makes people follow me and follow my work. And honestly, the recent stuff I've done with trying to build up my own brand and my own interest in data and gamification has been the least resonant of other stuff I've done. I used to do a zero waste YouTube channel and a book. thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, followed that stuff, and a popular consumer sort of fashionable magazine. So the stuff that you've seen has actually been really slow to build because it's very specific. Like people don't look up on Google. I think today I'm going to learn about like feedback loops and gamification of environmental data, and bingo, there comes up Katie Patrick. So that doesn't really happen. I have to
but you reckon,
slowly
for
get it
example,
out.
so the zero waste thing, were people actively seeking that thing out?
Yeah,
and
so
then
people will
coming
look up
across
things
you?
like how to use less plastic, how to make your own toothpaste or whatever. But it wasn't, but the only answer I have is that I've been on this trip for the last 5 years or so, that the only thing I've been trying to do with my life is to creatively express myself in a way that felt the most interesting and real to me, like just to do what I thought was awesome. And so with that came a book, a podcast, and a huge amount of concept design work for these Fitbits for the Planet style games. Because every time I thought of like a game-ish type thing I wanted to build, I would just design it and put it out there. And people really fall in love with that stuff. So I've just been putting that out there and doing that. And this is just what it's turned into. I didn't really have a goal. I just felt this enormous need to kind of put my creative fingerprint out in the world. And that's all I've done. But I think when you do that from a really real place, like that is naturally resonant with people because it's real. You're not trying to be something fake. You're not trying to turn yourself into something or achieve something. You're just basically being like, what do I have inside me that's unique and awesome, and let me get it out. And people like that. So it's a bit slower than other things that are more popular, but it's real, and people really do fall in love with the work I do now. But it's taken a while to build all this up. It just doesn't happen by itself, and nobody is Googling gamification of environmental impact. So I got to get out to people like one at a time,
Yeah, for sure. No, definitely stuff doesn't, very few things happen overnight, both the good and the bad. So hey, thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you for listening. Please visit fataleria.blog to join our mailing list and help support our community and project. And if you like the music, please check out the Happy Quartet on Bandcamp. That's it for today.